welcome to my first YouTube video. In this video you will see the process of how I create an ice princess gown. These are my sketches. This is taffeta lining and some organza, lace. Now that I have the materials, it's time to cut. I have started with cutting a full circle skirt, which is measuring the length of the skirt plus adding like 5 to 8 more inches due to that this is going to have a petticoat. It's going to be very fluffy. You need to add extra length in order for the dress to not come out to be too short, and the girl is going to have high heels as well, so it's important to always add extra length to the circle skirts that you're doing. I'm doing the same thing to this organza, to the baby blue organza. I'm cutting it actually a little bit longer because organza tends to sway and weight, so I'm gonna have to end up adjusting the level of how straight it's gonna look at the bottom once it's already put together. I am using the baby blue as a pattern to cut the same thing for the white organza. For the lace, I want to use the width of it instead of cutting it circular because it has the fringe on the bottom, the scalloped edge, and I want to use that for the bottom of the dress. I want it to be shown. Now I just want to place the fabrics on top of each other just to see what I like best and how is the order of the layers that it's gonna go. I'm just trying to figure that out. Now moving on for the bodice. The bodice pieces are gonna have all of the layers. First I'm cutting off the lace. Some of the patterns pieces that I use for this are my own molded patterns. This is a plus size dress, so I did have to do a lot of modifications, and I also left more seam allowance. The fun part about this is that I actually used a very vintage pattern that I found, and it was more like a costume Victorian type of corset. It was very much the style that we were looking for, so I had fun altering the pieces. As you can see, this has a lot of fabric, so now I'm going to do a stay stitch, layering all of the fabrics together, so that way when I am to sew the bodice, the fabric doesn't go all over the place and everything comes out crooked. So all of the pieces need to have a stay stitch with all of the fabric that we're going to be sewing together. And on another note, that white material that you see, it is muslin. I use that under the corset to give it stability aside adding boning, because it will make the bodice firm and stay instead of adding a bunch of interfacing. When doing stay stitches, it is recommended to use the widest setting on your sewing machine, so that way when you pull the stitch out, if you need to pull it out, you can just pull the thread out instead of having to seam reap stitch by stitch. In this part, I'm just going to be sewing the pieces together for the quick fitting, just to see how everything fits and what needs to be adjusted, so everything is not really placed together as it would go as in the finishing look. It's just going to be for the fitting before adding more detailed work. And now the bodice is done and ready for the fitting. and I am liking how this is coming out to be. Now it's time to start sewing all of the layers of the skirt that they're gonna be. This is the lace, which I just did one simple stitch because I didn't want the seam to look if I was going to overlock it. So one simple straight stitch is fine. For all of the organza, I did the French seam so it wouldn't fray or pull or snag. The waistline, it's not gonna be the end waistline, but I'm just doing it really fast just for the fitting, just to see if the waistband was gonna fit with the corset and everything. So nothing of this is permanent. This is just a quick put together for the first fitting. And on a quick note, as I mentioned in the beginning, how uneven the bottom looks is because organza and chiffon tend to always be uneven. So you always want to cut longer so you can have more leverage when you are doing the hemming. Now that the first fitting was done and I made the proper adjustments, I am adding bone casing, which is this bias cut tape that I always use to add the plastic boning. The cuts that you see me doing to the seams is you wanna make little notches to the seam allowance, so that way the curve that you have on the bodice or any kind of shape that you have, I'm only adding bone casing into the boning areas where I want to add boning into. It's not every seam, it's just the areas where it needs proper structure and support. When adding the bone casing, try to always leave the 1/4 inch of the seam allowance free, so that way it wouldn't be too bulge when you're gonna do the other overseam. So always end up cutting the casing shorter than your actual seam is going to be. Now that I have all of my bone casings in place, this is the boning that I usually get and that I like to use. I'm gonna finish that off and then close it up with the lining. And now we're going to move over to the decorations. I will be using this lace applique, which comes together, but since it's an applique, you can cut in between and make it expand and cut it basically to any shape that you want, like I'm showing here. You can just adjust it and design it as however that you please. And this is the way that I'm doing mine. I have a lot of little scissors that I use for all kinds of things. Most of my scissors I find at a local craft store like a Joann's, Hobby Lobby, or at specialty sewing shops. Once I have my design placement and ready to go, I use an invisible thread to thread because the white was going to show too much. So it's just a basic like zigzag stitch that you go around all of the lace design. Once the design was done and sewn, it is ready for the last fitting and final adjustments. I really like how this lace applique worked with the bodice, and you give it some shape and design. It would also be adding sleeves to this. For the layers of the skirt, I used a machine called Marrow. It gives a finishing edge to very delicate fabrics and prevents it from fraying. It works really well for that. Now I am adding the trim, which is the trimming lace. And since it came kind of like together, I have to cut it and pin everything down, ready to be sewn by hand. Also, the lace appliques on the skirt, they all have to be sewn down by hand. I nearly ran out of pins trying to get this stuff together, but once it's done, you're ready to sew. And this is the overall look. I added a filter for additional shimmery effect, but hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give it a like and subscribe, and I'll try to upload more content. Making videos and dresses is kind of complicated, but I can try my best. Thank you. Bye. You're mine for sure.